Wife caught cheating in front of husband. I have to admit that I've been out of the loop for a while now, so lately I've been writing about incidents in the past. Don't get me wrong, at my 74 years old, I can still have sex once a week with my wonderful and cranky wife, Deborah. She is a doctor, and she does make this old man's life interesting. But what was 3 or 4 times a week is now mostly a memory. Such is life. And although my body is showing signs of fading, I'm still doing just fine. In any case, the memories help, and I enjoy writing them down. Even the ones I'm admittedly not very proud of. Like this one, for example. There's nothing erotic here, if that's your goal. Sorry. We all have secrets, some are hard to share. This is one of them. I suspect that in most of my stories I am far more kinky than I let on. I also know that I am a very different person today than I was when I was younger. In society, you see, there are morals, and there are rules by which things must happen. When someone is caught breaking those rules, like some government official or a celebrity who has a lover on the side, it causes a scandal. The real difference between a scandal and an unremarkable one is who got caught, just a fact of life. Like with that Hollywood guy in the news, did you notice that almost all of the actresses who accused him managed to escape with their purity intact? And if they didn't, then they were used? No aspiring actress would ever shed her clothes in exchange for a juicy, high-paying movie role. Of course not. I contend that every one of you reading these pages has something in your past that you'd rather not tell your friends or family about. I have too, and this is one of the instances. This story happened when I was a very young man. I have to admit that I'm not proud of what I allowed to happen, but it did. The only time in my entire life I will admit that I let things get out of hand. Of course, there are other times, but this is the one that has always bothered me. I've been cheated on, that's another matter, and that often seriously angers a person. In this case, I confess, I was guilty. I remember those magical 60s. Our world was filled with news of war. Birth control for women had just appeared on the scene, which completely changed the mores of the nation. Suddenly, young and virile men, for the most part, stopped carrying the almost mandatory contraceptive in their wallets if they expected to have sex at all, and sex for many became a nice way to say hello. Since young and available men were in short supply, those who managed to avoid the draft seemed to be able to choose for themselves. I did not escape the draft, even though I was married, with a young and extremely active wife at home. This, of course, delayed things. But then the letter finally arrived, and I found myself in a country I knew nothing about, fighting for a cause that to this day I have no idea why it was needed or why it was needed. I could have died there, and many stories would never have been told, but I was lucky. If only the 2 rounds that got me sent home can be called lucky. They didn't kill me. So that's something, I guess. I remember lying in my bunk with a lot of other guys, and then they came and handed out medals. I was coming home, an official hero. Of course, back home, because of the politics of the time, we were almost universally hated. When half a dozen of us got off the plane in Portland, we saw people with placards yelling, calling us names. One young woman was right in my face. If I had met her in a bar, she would have danced with me, even possibly ended up in my bed. But in my uniform, she hated me. That was the custom in those days. My wife's name was Sharon, and she was, and still is, a tiny babe. Barely 4 feet 9 inches, stretched out as far as she could go, and 93 pounds, she was endowed with beautiful C-cup breasts. I could wrap my arms around her waist, touching lightly with my fingertips. Naked, she was simply stunning. There isn't a movie star or model on this planet that she wasn't at least comparable to. Sharon and I met through a buddy of mine named Bobby. He was a horn dog, nothing special, just like me at the time. He had a girlfriend named Becky. Her father wouldn't let her date anyone unless it was a double date. The idea was, of course, to protect her purity. It was like it was working. We drove to the movies, and Bobby had Becky's breasts out of her blouse before we even reached the first stoplight leading out of town. Becky had a great pair, and she seemed to enjoy showing them off to anyone who looked. just the way they were. I'd already gotten a couple glances at them, but Bobby immediately pulled them off. I adjusted the rearview mirror to get a good look at them. Becky didn't mind one bit. She somehow managed to keep things like that a secret from Daddy, though I don't know how. With Sharon, it was the opposite. She fought back every time I tried to feel her, even through her clothes. So much for the two hotties Bobby told me about. Only one hottie. Bobby was washing Becky in the back seat while I was up front with Sharon, who still kissed me on the lips after I dropped her off. I managed to see Becky's body. Bobby rubbed my shoulder and I turned and looked. She was leaning back on the passenger side of the back seat, and the flickering light from the movie theater illuminated her body well. She looked up at me, smiled, put one hand down her body and stroked herself while I looked at her. Becky didn't mind me seeing her like this either. That moment was probably the hottest moment of my life, but I liked Sharon and we started dating. Finally, after a few dates, I got my hands on those magnificent breasts. We were very close to sex a few times, and she started using her hands on me as a way to save herself for marriage. Eventually, I asked her to marry me. She squealingly agreed, and that night in the car, she no longer resisted. Of course, by then, I had already dated Becky several times, as well as half a dozen other girls we both knew. So Sharon was well aware that I had already had sex more than once, but it didn't seem to bother her in the least. But when Sharon and I had consummated it, I didn't notice other women anymore. Sharon was the sexiest woman I'd ever held in my arms, and to this day, she has the best body of any woman I've ever known. Now, my current wife, Deborah, is gorgeous. It's just that Sharon was 19 at the time, and any comparison would be unfair. Everything was fine in the marriage. Sex was every day, and even more often. Our life together was just fine until that letter came. We talked. God, we talked. We tearfully told each other that everything would work out for the best for us. We even discussed what she would do if I didn't come home. And we discussed what to do about sex. I told her that I would understand if things got too rough. If she decided to have sex with someone, she would have to use protection, and then it wouldn't count. Of course, it was all a load of crap. I thought she would be totally faithful, I would be the same while I was in the service, and everything would be fine when the war was over. The truth is, I got plenty of handshakes and caresses from the tiny little women there. There was no shortage of those who were willing for a few American dollars. I never had sex with any of them, seeing guys lining up to get their share of the body. And I expected to come home to my loving wife, pristine and pure, just as I had left her. That didn't turn out to be quite the case. I stayed home for about 2 weeks, continuing to heal, when the truth began to come out. I think my staying home came as a surprise to some of the men who showed up at our house. Finding me there, they made one excuse after another until word got out. I heard, "Dan, I heard you were home. How are you?" Often enough from guys I barely knew to start suspecting something. So one night, after putting down about 4 beers, I asked her about it. Her face instantly turned bright red, and I received several inarticulate admissions when I demanded an answer. To this day, I'm not sure I heard everything, but the list was pretty long. There was screaming, crying, more screaming. She blamed me for what I had done, and angry, I moved out of the house and into a rundown apartment in the city. 2 days later, she knocked on my door. 5 minutes later, she was out of her clothes and we made up. It will never happen again. Couldn't help it, were the tearful comments. She went on at length about how sorry she was, that she loved me and only me, that it was just the two of us forever now, business as usual. But what she was really digging at was me. At the store, some guy would stare at her longer than usual. This was nothing new as it had happened before. But now I wondered if she was with him. I asked. She denied it. We managed, but barely. One day, a guy named Donnie stopped by to see me. He wanted to look at a small 16-foot boat I had for sale. I knew Donnie from high school. He was 2 grades behind me. He didn't buy the boat, but he had a few beers and we became friends. Donnie became a regular at our house. He was good company. We made a pretty good pair. I was just over 6 feet tall and about 180 pounds, and he, if he kept his shoes on, was about 5 feet 3 inches tall and 130 or so. We went fishing. We bowled together. He liked to hunt with a bow, so I bought one and became quite good at using it. Sharon was a faithful homemaker again. She was a good cook, so Donnie was often at our dinners. Buddies is what you could call what we were. The day came when Bobby, Becky, Donnie, Sharon, and I had one of those Saturday night get-togethers that grow into full-blown parties. Bobby had pot, of course, and was making sure everyone got high. Becky was wearing one of those tops that allowed her to show off her breasts with no problem. We were all used to it by now, and it had escalated to the point where instead of having accidents, she was pretty clearly letting them dangle. At one point, I told her she might as well go topless. She giggled and agreed. So here she is, naked to the waist, looking eagerly at Sharon. Bobby and Donnie competed with each other in their ability to make jokes, encouraging Sharon. I was a little surprised when Sharon finally gave in and took off her top. Sharon had never worn a bra. In fact, she didn't even own one. She also never wore panties, which had gotten to her from her mother who claimed they caused disease. But of course she always wore long dresses or jeans, so that was a secret. I thought it was. At least I didn't know at the time that my friend Bobby was on the list of those that Sharon took to try out while I was in the war. Since Bobby and I had always been close, she left that point out on purpose. She knew that if she told me about it, Bobby would get beat up. A guy named Doug had already learned firsthand that making snide remarks in my presence was a mistake. The judge was sympathetic and let me off with 2 days' time served. So, with both women sitting bare-chested in plain view, the conversation, of course, turned to sex. Bobby teased Donnie that he didn't have a girlfriend, so he was unlikely to get sex. Donnie casually mentioned that he had never had sex and that he just wasn't successful with women. This was a surprise to me. I guess I should have known, but I didn't. Of course, Bobby, like a smart ass, started teasing Donnie even more, and poor Donnie flushed. Then Bobby tried to get Becky to show Donnie her body, saying things like, "Give the poor guy a treat," and that sort of nonsense. But eventually things settled down. It was getting late, so Bobby and Becky left. Donnie stayed. By then, he had spent the night on our couch more than once. Sharon went inside and got some blankets. She was still topless, but before she came out, she put on a nightgown that was floor-length flannel. Donnie's face reflected disappointment. He seemed to really enjoy seeing bare breasts for the last couple hours. "Hey, honey, you should stay topless. Poor Donnie enjoyed it," exclaimed I. Now I have no idea why I said that. I was just being a wise ass. Probably because I was on a roll at that moment. Sharon laughed, looked at me, and pulled her nightgown down to her waist. "How do you like this?" she asked Donnie. "God, you're beautiful," muttered Donnie. "You should put on a show for Donnie. He's never seen a naked girl before," I told her. Sharon just looked at me. "Would you like that?" I asked Donnie. "Of course I would like it," he said. Sharon blinked a couple times, then grinned. Crossing her arms over her head, which women somehow know how to do, she pulled her nightgown over her head and was suddenly unclothed. Donnie's eyes widened as he leaned forward on the couch, and his gaze fell on Sharon's body. "There you go, your first girlfriend," I laughed. Normally, such a thought would never have crossed my mind, but I was drunk off my ass, and all three of us were too. Donnie was staring at her with his mouth open. Sharon just stood there. I could see her breasts tense up, the way they do when she's horny. "Give him a real show, baby," I told her with a laugh. Truth be told, the situation was turning me on too. Sharon came over and sat on the couch and played with Donnie. Poor Donnie was leaning forward so much he was about to fall off the chair, so I told him to go and walk over to her to get a good look. He did so, kneeling down right in front of her, his face a few inches from her face. There was a huge grin on Sharon's face. "That's not fair, Donnie. Let's look at yours," said Sharon to him. Without even looking in my direction, Donnie stood up and threw off his jeans. He was wearing a pair of boxer briefs. He reached down and dropped them too, taking a few jumps to get them all off since he still had his shoes on. Sharon was still lying reclined on the back of the couch, and Donnie was standing right in front of her. Sharon's facial expression changed, and she leaned forward and put her arm around him. That was all it took. Donnie pitched forward and had sex with her. I stood there amazed. It all happened much faster than I had anticipated, and I barely had time to react. Donnie pulled away before I could even utter a, "Hey!" It was my own fault, I know that. It was one thing to have sexual outbursts that went on all night, and quite another to have Donnie pounce on my wife and have sex with her. I didn't want that to happen, and I was suddenly angry at Sharon for allowing it. Leaving the room, I headed for the bedroom. After getting drunk off my ass, in no time at all I either fell asleep or passed out. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the window. It felt like a truck had driven over my head, and when I looked around, I saw that Sharon wasn't in bed with me. In the living room, I found her curled up on the couch in her nightgown. She had woken up just as I entered. Looking around, I didn't see Donnie and asked, "I don't know. He must have left before we woke up." Sharon sat up and stretched, yawning heavily. I was still angry that she had let Donnie have sex with her, but at the same time, it was partly my own fault, so I didn't say anything about it. I went to make breakfast, and Sharon took a shower. She came out and sat down at our table, and I handed her a scrambled egg and bacon. "Poor Donnie," she said, taking a bite. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's so little." She laughed. I just looked at her. "At least the first time." She took another bite. "What do you mean?" "He had sex with me 4 times and would have done more, but it hurt." "What? How could you?" I raised my voice. "Are you mad? Why? I mean, you were there for me. I thought you wanted it." "No, I didn't. It was just a look, a tease. I never expected it." "Well, you could have said something besides. You started it," she growled back at me. 4 times? What else did you let him do?" shouted I. "Honey, nothing. Nothing in particular." That's when I blew my stack. She stood on the porch yelling that he wasn't good enough to matter while I spun the tires of my old Dodge Ram in our driveway. Divorce wasn't that big of an issue. We had nothing to share, so there was nothing to fight about, and there was no fight at all. The town we were from was small. I was working at the local paper mill at the time. There were a few comments from guys I knew, but most of them knew enough to make sure I was well out of earshot. My reaction was usually instantaneous and quite violent if someone made a joke to my face. Almost a year later, I read Donnie's name in the papers. He had gone through boot camp, and on his first deployment he was dropped from a helicopter and never got to fire a shot. Perhaps a decade later, in a town 150 miles away, I stopped for gas. "Hey, Dan," I heard, sitting down and waiting for the clerk to finish. There stood Sharon. She was heavier now, obviously, and we got to talking. Then we went for coffee, talking some more. She was married again, 2 kids, one 7, the other 10. I asked the obvious question. She looked at me and said she didn't know. She showed me a picture of her 10-year-old, but it didn't help. He looked nothing like me. At that point, I had nothing to say and nothing to do. Years later, I received a large manila envelope. Inside was a DNA test. There was a short note, a smiley face, and at the end of the note it said, "Please?" I guess I wanted to know that too, so I swabbed my cheek and sent it in. The results came back, and I sat for a while just holding it in my hands. Did I really have a son? At that moment, I wanted it to be true, welcomed the idea. Finally, I opened it. 0.0%, the inscription read. My best guess? The boy was Donnie's. But I'll never know. Sometimes I sit and think, remembering. The woman Sharon was when we first got together was perfect for me. She was my first real love, and I was her first real experience. Sometimes I sit and think, absent-mindedly rubbing with my fingertips the half-inch circles on my left side that someone far away sent in our direction, and 2 of them found me. I would have lived a very different life, but some things just can't be controlled. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you!